Young Tommy came bursting through the front door, proudly holding up a bag of groceries. "Grandpa, I got everything on your list. The total came to $47.22, and here's your change." Grandpa, lounging in his old recliner, let out a long whistle. "Well, I'll be. The world sure has gotten expensive. Back when I was your age, a nickel could buy you a whole feast. I could get 5 pounds of potatoes, 3 loaves of bread, 2 pounds of beef, a jug of milk, a tin of tobacco for my old man, and a handful of my favorite candies, all for just 5 cents. Tommy's eyes went wide. "Wow, Grandpa, what happened? Why can't you do that anymore?" Grandpa leaned in, lowered his voice, and with a knowing smirk whispered, "Too many bloody cameras." At 70 years old, Margaret had lived a full life, but loneliness was starting to weigh on her. After much thought, she decided it was time to find herself a new husband. Not wanting to waste time on the wrong men, she placed a very specific ad in the local newspaper. "Husband wanted. Must be in my age group, 70s. Must not beat me. Must not run around on me. Must still be good in bed. All applicants. Please apply in person." She waited. The first day, nothing. The second day, still no luck. But on the third day, the doorbell rang. Margaret hurried to the door full of anticipation, but when she swung it open, her heart nearly stopped. Sitting on her front porch was an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair. He had neatly combed gray hair, a warm smile, and no arms or legs. She blinked. "You're not seriously applying, are you?" she asked, trying to hide her skepticism. "I mean, just look at you. You have no legs." The old man chuckled. "That's right, my dear, which means I can't run around on you." Margaret crossed her arms. "And you don't have any arms either." Another smile. "Exactly. So I could never raise a hand against you." She tapped her chin, considering. Then, narrowing her eyes, she leaned in and asked the most important question. "But are you still good in bed?" The old man leaned back, grinned, and said, "Rang the doorbell, didn't I?" At 83 years old, Harold McLeod was not a man easily rattled. A proud Canadian, he had seen more of the world than most, and now, after a long flight, he had finally landed in Paris. As he shuffled up to the French customs desk, he fumbled through his carry-on, searching for his passport. The customs officer, a young man with an air of impatience, folded his arms. "You have been to France before, monsieur?" he asked with a hint of sarcasm. Harold nodded. "Oh yes, I've been here before." The officer sighed. "Then you should know to have your passport ready." Harold paused for a moment before replying. "Funny thing," he said. "The last time I was here, I didn't need to show it." The officer scoffed. "Impossible. Canadians always have to show their passports upon arrival in France." Harold gave him a long, steady look. Then, in a quiet but firm voice, he said, "Well, son, the last time I came ashore in France was June 6th, 1944, Juno Beach. Back then, I couldn't find a single Frenchman to show it to." A heavy silence fell over the desk. The officer's face shifted from arrogance to understanding. Clearing his throat, he stamped Harold's passport without another word and handed it back with a respectful nod. Harold tucked it away, gave the young man a small smile, and walked on, just as he had all those years ago, stepping onto French soil with a purpose. It was early morning when old Frank, well into his 80s, got up from bed and began putting on his coat. His wife Margaret watched him from her rocking chair, curiosity in her eyes. "Where are you going this early?" she asked. Frank buttoned up his coat and straightened his collar. "I'm going to the doctor." Margaret frowned. "The doctor? Why? Are you feeling sick?" No, Frank chuckled. "I'm going to get me some of those new Viagra pills." Margaret raised an eyebrow. Without a word, she pushed herself up from her chair, reached for her sweater, and started putting it on. Frank eyed her suspiciously. "And where do you think you're going?" Margaret smirked. "To the doctor." Frank looked puzzled. "Why? You're not the one taking the pills?" Margaret gave him a knowing glance as she pulled her sweater snug. "No," she said, "but if you're planning on using that rusty old thing again, I'm getting a tetanus shot." It was a scorching afternoon as old Scrooge, the miser, and his grandson Tim trudged along the sun-baked pavement, making their way home from a party. Tim wiped the sweat from his forehead and groaned. "Gramps, it's still a long way to our house. It's so hot and I'm exhausted. Look, there's a bus stop right here. Can we please take the bus home?" Scrooge stopped in his tracks, his face twisted in horror. "Take the bus? Are you mad? That would cost us $6 whole." He shook his head vehemently. No, we'll walk. It builds character." Tim sighed but didn't argue. He was used to his grandfather's penny-pinching ways. They had barely taken a few steps when Scrooge suddenly threw up his hand and flagged down a passing taxi. "Good afternoon, sir," he greeted the driver. "How much to take us to Springfield Avenue?" The cabbie glanced at him. "Springfield Avenue? That'll be around $20. Scrooge recoiled as if he'd been slapped. $20? Outrageous! He waved the driver off. "Never mind, we won't be requiring your services." As the taxi sped away, Tim turned to his grandfather, exasperated. "Gramps, did you really think a taxi would be cheaper than the bus?" Scrooge scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous." "Then why did you even ask?" Scrooge puffed up his chest and smirked. "Foolish boy! We saved $6 by not taking the bus. Now we've saved $20 by not taking the taxi." One day, a young couple snuck into a field to have some private time. Just as they were getting into it, a little boy happened to pass by and caught them in the act. The couple panicked and the boy grinned and said, "I won't tell anyone, if you let me try too." The girl hesitated but eventually agreed. The boy excitedly stepped forward, but after several awkward attempts, nothing happened. He kept trying and trying, but nothing. Frustrated, he finally threw his hands up and said, "You know what? I'm telling everyone, bad things deserve punishment." Dear granddaughter, the other day I went to our local Christian bookstore and saw the most delightful thing, a "Honk If You Love Jesus" bumper sticker. Well, you know me, I was feeling particularly sassy after an exhilarating choir performance and a thunderous prayer meeting, so I bought it and proudly stuck it on my car. Oh, what an uplifting experience that turned out to be. Later that afternoon, I was stopped at a red light, completely lost in thought about the Lord's goodness when suddenly, honk! What a blessing! Someone else loved Jesus too. Before I knew it, more cars joined in. Honk, honk, honk! The man behind me must have been especially passionate about his faith because he leaned out of his window and started shouting, "For the love of God, go, 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 Jesus Christ, go!" What a wonderful cheerleader for the Lord. Inspired by the enthusiasm, I rolled down my window and waved joyfully at all my fellow believers. Some were even waving back. One gentleman gave me a particularly enthusiastic one-finger wave. I assume it was a Hawaiian good luck sign. Not wanting to be rude, I smiled and returned the gesture. My grandson, who was sitting in the back seat, immediately burst into laughter. He must have been touched by all the Christian fellowship. Then a few people became so overwhelmed with joy that they actually stepped out of their cars and started walking toward me. I figured they wanted to pray together or invite me to their church, but just then I noticed the light had changed. Feeling a little sad to leave my new brothers and sisters behind, I drove forward, the only car to make it through before the light turned red again. Wanting to share the love one last time, I slowed down, leaned out the window, and gave them all the Hawaiian good luck sign as a farewell blessing. Praise the Lord for such wonderful people. Love, Grandma. When I started working, I had big dreams. I was going to find the perfect career, one that suited me like a glove. Turns out that was easier said than done. My first job was at an orange juice factory, but I got canned. I just couldn't concentrate. Then I tried my hand as a lumberjack. That didn't last long either. I just couldn't hack it, so they gave me the axe. Thinking I needed a more refined career, I became a tailor. Unfortunately, I wasn't suited for it. Honestly, it was a so-so job. I figured a fast-paced environment might be better, so I joined Starbucks. But after a while, I got tired of the same old grind. Cooking sounded exciting, so I became a chef. I thought it would add spice to my life. Turns out I just didn't have the time. Next, I worked at a deli, but anyway I sliced it, I just couldn't cut the mustard. Music seemed like a good fit, so I became a musician. But in the end, I just wasn't noteworthy. I even studied for years to become a doctor, but I realized I had no patience. Thinking I needed something more practical, I joined a shoe factory. But no matter how hard I tried, I just didn't fit in. I gave fishing a go, but I found I couldn't live on my net income. Hoping for something steady, I took a job at a pool maintenance company. Sadly, the work was too draining. Then I worked at a gym, but they said I wasn't fit for the job. Eventually, I became a historian, thinking I'd finally found my calling. That's when I realized there was no future in it. My last attempt was at a muffler factory, but let me tell you, that job was just too exhausting. After all those years of trying, I finally found the perfect job, retirement. And you know what? I'm absolutely perfect for it. It was a crisp autumn evening at the hunting lodge, and the warm glow of the fireplace flickered across the faces of the gathered hunters. Two new members, eager to be part of the club, were being shown around by an old-timer. As they passed the fireplace, the guide gestured toward an elderly man dozing in a worn leather chair. "See that old fella?" he whispered. "That's Bill. He's our oldest member, been hunting longer than any of us. He's got stories you wouldn't believe." Curious, the newcomers nudged Bill awake. With a deep breath, the old hunter stirred, blinked a few times, and stretched. "Tell us a hunting story," one of them urged. Bill smirked and leaned forward. "All right," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "I remember back in '44, we were on a lion hunt in Africa. We were on foot, tracking for 3 days without so much as a glimpse of a cat. By the 4th day, I was dead tired. Found myself a fallen tree, laid my rifle down, rested my head, and drifted off." The men listened intently as Bill's voice lowered. I don't know how long I was out when I heard rustling in the bushes. I reached for my gun, but before I could grab it, the biggest lion I ever saw leapt out at me. Suddenly, Bill threw his arms wide and bellowed, "Roar!" The two young hunters nearly jumped out of their boots. One of them exhaled sharply and said, "Good Lord, I don't blame you. If a lion jumped out at me like that, I'd have crapped my pants too." Bill shook his head, his face dead serious. No, not then. Just now when I said, "Roar!"